All right. Greetings, everybody. I'm meeting with my friend Joel Straus this evening, and I've known Joel a long time. 30 years, Joel, something like that?
I have to say that, and I won't bore you with the story, but my first job, which lasted 1 week, was with Paul-Klein.
Oh, and you remember that better than I, huh?
Yeah, much better than you.
You weren't fired, were you?
No, I got a job at Richard Gray. I left you for greener pastures.
Grayer pastures. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I won't hold it against you. All right. I want to talk about your involvement in the art world and how it began. Did you go to art school?
I did. Well,
earlier than that, did you think you were going to be an artist?
I thought that. I thought that I had an aspiration of making my living as an artist. However, I worked. I had a dual degree, basically art history and studio, and I knew the work that I wanted to do. Before I made my living as an artist, was to work in a gallery, and as soon as I hit Chicago from North Carolina, I got job. I worked for you literally the second day I was here, and then while I was working with you, I got a job at Richard Gray, and it sort of I ended up moving more towards that side of working in the arts rather than making my living as a successful artist.
So in working in the arts, did you ever flirt with the notion of having an art gallery of your own?
Ever so briefly. Yes, I did. When I had an opportunity and a backer to open a gallery, and I just ultimately that's not what I wanted to do, and I couldn't figure out for the life of me after doing a business plan that I would make any money. Or more importantly, I could make money, but I would never make him his money. So it was something I just didn't feel comfortable doing, and knowing that you really had to have pretty deep pockets to get through the different economic cycles. So not really. I mean,
so you got out of art school and you worked for Richard Gray Gallery for how long?
11 years.
That's a while. Did your position change during your tenure there?
About immediately. I started out as the guy who packed the artwork and contained, the preparator, and pretty quickly, I mean, within just a few weeks, I was taught how to use a big, large format camera, 5x7 camera, and I started taking all the images for the catalogs and all of that. And then had a lot of client interaction, mostly as the guy who held the painting. And then within, 6 months, a year, I was talking to clients, and the natural extension was just selling. So I did a little bit of everything. And I worked there, as I said, I worked for 11 years and had a studio much of the time. And then I gave that up pretty soon after I left the gallery. And the history is that during, it was Richard Gray Gallery was a Protestant business, and clearly there was a limitation to my aspirations, and I had the opportunity through one of my clients, which was an interior architecture firm called Larson Associates, to curate the first part of the McCormick Place collection in the new South Building. So that's really how I broke from the gallery world into the public art world. And I've really pretty much done public art projects from about 1996, 95, 96 until today. But my business now is much more diversified than it was even 4 years ago.
Let's talk about public art. Let's start with a definition.
No, that's an interesting thing. Well, public art has, there are many ways you can define it. You can define it as art in public places, which that does not speak to the source of the funding for for public art. Now, typically, people associate public art with public funding, which is, often the case, but certainly it's not exclusively the case. There are many public art projects that are privately funded, but it's art in public places. So there really isn't one solid definition. It's one of those things that if you participate in the Public Art Network, which is part of the American City Art, you will see, and go back into history, there's probably every 18 months this question comes up: what is public art? In fact, it just came up today on the listserv. It's private money, and it's not. And the offering is only for African American artists. Why are they calling it public art? So it starts a whole other cycle of what public art means. That doesn't really help you, but you get the idea that there are many variations.
All right, let's segue to the process. What are the things that tend to be common to all these different kinds of public art creations experiences?
Well, typically, first of all, typically there's an ordinance. Somewhere, some city.
There's a what?
There's an ordinance. There's a law that requires to place art in a public place under certain guidelines, certain percentage of what a construction budget is for a public building. That is, the building is put up by a city, state, or even the federal government, which is not really a public art program, but the Art in Public Places program of the VSA. So if we're talking about publicly funded art, there is it's a requirement in many cities. So that's where it starts. Privately funded public art can come from two reasons. One is that, let's say there's a developer who just happens to have passion for art and wants to have art in the public place. And then the third variation is that in many places they're called private, it's a public art requirement for private development. You see these ordinances in California, some in Florida, where any development over a certain threshold is required to either put a piece of public art that is put in front of a committee to pass whether it's acceptable or not, or they have to give a certain percentage of their construction budget to the public art fund, and then the public art committee will send it as they see fit.
Okay, but let's move this further and realize we're talking to a group of 40 artists. Okay. And let's talk specifically to them about what's relevant to their experience. So how does one find out about public art possibilities?
There are many sources. The first is an organization called Cafe, and you can Google it. And you have to join. It's free to join. But they have public calls all the time. They're probably, I don't know, there are 10 a week probably of different sorts. You should, if you're interested in public art, you should definitely something happen.
No, I'm pulling up the website. Keep going.
You should join the Public Art Network. I referred to that earlier. It's called, it's part of the Americans for the Arts. And you will see many advertisements or offerings or calls for public art in Canada. There are many sources, but those are two of the main ones. The interesting thing, if you're interested in public art about CAN, the listserv, is that it's both artists who are interested in public art as well as art administrators. So it's kind of, you get to hear what's going on behind the scenes, and you'll often hear of an administrator saying, how would you do this sort of public policy? You know something's going to happen in a certain place. So you sort of get behind the get behind the float of what's going on.
Hey, Joel, I'm sorry to interrupt. A couple of people are commenting about you being hard to understand, and maybe you should put your mic on. Let's try that.
Okay.
You know, it's fine for me, but I know your accent.
Let's see. My glasses.
So, Joel, while you're doing this, can you multitask? One of the sources you mentioned was Cafe, which
Right.
I pulled up the website, callforentry.org. Call for entries, what Cafe stands for. And what's the other one?
The Public Art Network.
Public Art Network. Let me see if I can look that up.
And that's also that's a membership organization. The other thing I would highly suggest is a colleague of mine, and I think she's been on one of Paul's webinars. Lynn Baisner wrote a book specifically about transitioning from a studio practice to a public art practice. And in that book, there are many. She lists many sources for finding public art projects. There are two kinds. Well, I'm going to simplify it. There are two basic sorts of calls. One is called a request for proposal, and one is called a request for qualifications. And there's a difference. The request for qualifications is what it sounds like. It is, and it's for the most part, what is mostly accepted by the Public Art Network and Public Art Council.
What happened to the headphone?
You hear me?
Oh, you have it on?
Okay. Can you not, is it still no good?
I don't know. It sounds the same to me. Let's just go with it.
So a request for qualifications is just that. You send in your portfolio or whatever they're asking for, and they judge you and evaluate you on your qualifications. The request for proposal is actually asking you, the artist, to come up with a proposal. And these are somewhat frowned upon because they're asking an artist to do free work. However, having said that, it's also an opportunity for artists who are inexperienced to have an opportunity to break into the public art world, because typically the budgets aren't as high for requests for proposals. And if it's good, you can get the project without having ever done a public art project before. Request for qualifications, pretty much, it's more slanted towards artists who've actually done public art projects.
Okay. So typically people who are soliciting or have a desire for public art will post their intentions.
Exactly. There will be a call for a request, as I said, either RFQ, request for qualifications, or RFQ, request for proposal. And that is a document, usually legal, and that stipulates what you need to send them, what they're interested in looking for, and they describe the project. Oftentimes there will be architectural plans to show you where this piece is supposed to go. There's a budget, and the art of answering these requests is trying to discern what they're really looking for. And then they will ask you to do a letter of interest, which is what you can do for them, not why you're interested in doing it. And then portfolio slides, and oftentimes references. So that's what you will see that online. Sometimes they are restricted to artists in certain states, or a variety, or artists only from the U.S. There are a variety of restrictions. So you have to read everything very carefully. There's a deadline which you must meet. And there's more and more often the requests are being done electronically, like on Cafe.
What kind of numbers of submissions do these people get? How many applicants?
I think it's certainly proportional to the budget. The smaller the budget, the fewer, and the more locally bound the project is, the fewer. When I was doing, when I did the Washington, I created the art collection for the Washington D.C. Convention Center. I think we received, if my memory serves me, several thousand. And then you receive, and this was, I mean, we were sort of in the throes of both digital and slides. So then there's a process after you submit, and I think that's really important to understand. So all the artists submit their proposal or their qualifications, slides, portfolios, letters of interest, and some administrator goes through, and the first thing they do is they find, if you didn't meet one of the components of the call, and you're immediately just, you're just struck out of the group. And then, depending on the locality, or the administrator will set up all these slides and show them to a committee. There's a committee that's formed. It can be the architects of the project, it could be city officials, it could be citizens, it could be stakeholders, it could be a variety of different people, and it's different every single time. If you can understand who that committee is, it's always better. They might tell you, they might not. So they will go through everyone's portfolio, show them the committee, and what they're looking for, what they're looking to do in the first stages is really how to call people out. They're not really looking for the person, but they're like, how do you extract as many as possible? So part of the process is to make sure you don't give them a reason to. And that is being very, very, very considered about how you make the presentation to them. Then there are a number of stages. So then it gets pared down to 5. They will often tell you in the call to 5 finalists, and then they will ask for you to actually do a proposal. And they should, and most of them do, pay you for that, several thousand, from 500 to maybe 1,500, a couple $1,000 bucks to do the proposal, which means also flying to whatever that location is and doing a presentation. And from that group of finalists, the winner is chosen. And then that's a whole other trajectory, it's a whole other process after someone has been chosen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. What are the artists' responsibilities once they are selected to create a work of public art?
Well, that's what I've actually given some lectures and workshops. You are required. The budget you've been given the budget for a project, and usually the budget that you're given as part of you've been given as part of the call is the net budget. It's a lump sum budget. And what I mean by that is you're given, let's just for example, you're told you have $100,000. From that $100,000, you have to design it. You have to make sure that it follows all the city requirements for outdoor work. It has to be engineered properly. You have to make some money accordingly. And you have to construct it and install it. So your first requirement after getting it is, actually the first thing is you sign a contract. Oftentimes now the contract is part of the policy, you see it ahead of time. And that's a negotiable document, even though it appears like it's not negotiable. Just make sure that you understand it really is negotiable. It's hard at that point to feel like you have the power to do it, but you really need to do that. And the contract is a whole other branch. It's very complicated, and you could spend a whole webinar on that. So your first responsibility then is to take the budget and show your your client how you're going to divide that budget out so that they're certain that you can do it and that you can do it for the budget that you've been given. You're also given a timeline, and you've got to make sure that you can follow that timeline. Oftentimes it's part of a building project. Oftentimes it's part of its own timeline itself. So you have to come up with a budget, a timeline, and several meetings with this committee in different stages to explain to them, show them what this work is going to be like. Sometimes that involves a model. Sometimes it's just an electronic presentation. And then the next stage, once that's accepted, is that you get a much larger sum of money to then start the fabrication.
Let's pause a second. So many artists who are doing a public commission for the first time, let's say they've been making gallery art or they got tired of galleries and they want to make public art,
yeah.
They have certain tasks that they've never encountered before.
Many, yes.
Let's look so that what are some of those kinds of tasks that you know, before you get your ass in a ring, or, you know, like what are those tasks to be responsible for?
It starts back, I have to say, it starts back when you look at the call. You have to first decide for yourself whether you can afford to do this project. And forget capability. Is it possible to do it? And you have to figure out, you know, how many trips is it going to take? You know, your idea, how much is it going to cost to construct? And a lot of these things, so the first task, once let's fast forward to you get the project, you have to really figure out whether you can do this with a budget, leaving a portion for what your fee is going to be. Not only your time, but hopefully some profit. And typically the profit is something called a contingency. And I don't know if everyone knows what a contingency is, but that's a beautiful thing that is part of a budget that doesn't go to any one item, but in case there's a mistake or you need it at the very end, you can use this sum of money. So really, it's being educated about budget.
Let's take an example. All right. So let's say an artist has let's keep it around numbers, $25,000 commission. What are normal percentages? How much of that is a normal for, how much profit is that?
Let's say 100,000. Let's say 100,000.
Okay.
Make the numbers easier to see. I would say typically you want to take about 20%, somewhere between 20% for your fee. You have to figure out what your overhead is. That is, what is it going to cost you in your studio? What is it going to cost you in time to make this piece? You have to figure out the material costs. Are you going to make it yourself, or are you going to subcontract someone else to make it? Most public art now, on a large scale, it's subcontracted out to fabricators who are actually going to make this artwork for you. You have to figure out how many trips you're going to have to go to the fabricator if they're not local, how you get that piece from the fabricator to your site, how much it's going to cost to install the piece, and hopefully there's going to be something left over for you at the end. Also, there's almost always a ceremony of some sort which you're going to be at. You have to count that into the number of trips you have to take care of, whatever that location is. So the first projects I've always advised to do as locally as possible, because you simplify things dramatically by not having to do all the travel. And hopefully it's something at a scale that you can actually fabricate yourself. And that way you also simplify the process.
So, all right, what's the profit? The profit should be in the neighborhood of 20%?
Neighborhood, right.
And that includes the contingency fee, or the contingency fee is a separate line item?
It's typically, I always suggest it's a separate line item, and contingency is usually 10% of the budget. What is important to realize, and I think every artist that I know, even artists that exclusively do public work, when you have an idea that you feel vested in, you might often want to spend some of what is you're going to out of your pocket into the project to make it to fulfill the vision that you want it to be. And I think that's fine. I think what's important
What do you mean by that?
Well, let's say you have, you've put out of our $100,000, you said, I want to make $20,000. It might, over the 18 months or whatever amount of time it will take you to make this. And you realize that your fabrication costs, because you want to use a higher grade stainless or aluminum instead of stainless or whatever that material is, you realize it just bumped up your cost by 10%, and it's going to eat into what's going to be your fee. Maybe you've already spent the contingency, and you have to say to yourself, with open eyes, do I want to spend some of my fee for this purpose? And I think that's a decision that you make, that you have to make it with real numbers in front of you, and just not work on the project hoping that there's something at the end. I think the mistake that most artists make is they really aren't keeping a budget. I have, which I will send to you, Paul, I have a Excel sheet that I have that really runs through all of this for you. It's automated, so you can actually plug in numbers and figure some of this out in advance and during the process, which I'm happy to share.
Thank you. Okay. I think frequently that artists make mistakes in doing public commissions, encountering, like, should I have insurance? Do I really need an engineer? Should I get a lawyer to look at the contract? And I think invariably the answers to these questions is yes.
Absolutely. Almost always, you're going to need, or they're going to demand some sort of engineer, typically a structural engineer, to sign off on the drawing. Oftentimes you might need an architect and or engineer to do the drawings in CAD so that it's acceptable to your client. In terms of a lawyer, if you haven't had any experience, absolutely, you must get a lawyer. There's lawyers for the creative arts who will do this work pro bono, meaning for free. There are many examples of contracts online that you can look at. As I said, there are many important factors of the contract that you need to take into consideration. I don't think we really have the time to do that now.
Joel mentioned that he worked at McCormick, and Joel took care of the art for McCormick Place, the South Building, and subsequently I did the West Building. And then when they gave me contracts and asked me to send them to all the artists, and I looked at the contracts, and I was sort of in a middle position. To an extent I'm working for and with the artists, and to an extent I'm working for and with the building. And there were things in the contract that I had a lot of problem with. For example, McCormick, when I was doing it, wanted all the artists to relinquish their copyright. And I said, no, that's not the norm, that's not acceptable, strike that. And, they did that pretty quickly. McCormick, we also added that if a work of art constituted over 20% of an image that McCormick would be using for publicity, they had to get the artist's permission. I don't know if they've actually followed through on that, but, those are various kinds of things that might not be in a contract that are totally fair for you as the artist to insist upon. And I'm certain that there are other examples that we could look at, but, I just want to give you an idea.
More and more, the contracts that I see, rarely do they now ask to give up your copyright. What they often will do is ask you to give up your VERA rights. And that's, again, these are big topics. That's the Visual Artist Rights Act, which is some of the tenets involve whether they can actually change the artwork, whether they can, if it's site specific, can they move this artwork without your permission? And they're so-called moral rights, not copyright, not a copy, but the moral rights of, and you can look up Vera as well. What I tell artists is, and most of the time, if I'm involved, I try to get that struck away. But the reality is, there is very hard. It's all, the burden is completely on the artist to prove that your client did something that you didn't want them to do. It's kind of like copyright in that sense. It's up to you, the artist, to prove that your copyright was infringed. It's up to you, the artist, to prove that your Vera rights were infringed. So what I tell artists, if they want to do that, you can say, fine, I will sign this away, but here's what I want in my contract. I want you to, you can't move this piece without my permission. You can't change it without my permission. So the important parts of Vera you just make contractual, which is better for you anyway, because then you don't have to prove it. It's in the contract rather than being the burden on you. So all this stuff is probably much more complicated, you know, in this abbreviated format. But these are important things.
Of all the artists, Joel, that you've worked with doing public art, how many of them are also making gallery art at the same time?
That's a good question.
My sense is that a lot of artists go back and forth, and also then that there's a specialized subset of artists who almost only do public commissions.
I think there's actually every category. I think there are many artists who have done studio work and have transitioned to public work. I think some go back and forth, as you said. I tend to see more and more artists who are specifically working in the public arena. I think for many reasons. One is once they've gotten established, the budgets are bigger. There's, in many ways, there's less insecurity because when you have a project, you have a project. It's not sort of putting your work out there, hoping that it will sell. It has sold if you've gotten a project. And there are just many. The reality is there are many more opportunities for work in public places than there is in the opportunity of actually getting a gallery and selling your work. There are many. The gallery world, the gallery opportunity, the gallery market is really not so large in comparison to. Go ahead. You're going to say something?
Yeah, reputation. You know, not too many artists have their reputation enhanced or created by making most public art. We did a webinar recently with Alice Apop.
Yeah.
You know, Alice has got some major public commissions that she's done, and she's got a major thing happening on Park Avenue in New York, I think next spring, which will be, you know, significant. But, you know, she talked in her webinar to an extent about how you can be working all along and having a great career and making lots of money, but not necessarily does anybody know about it. Whereas if you're doing pretty well with galleries or art fairs, it seems like that there's more attention to what's going on in your career.
Well, okay, let me speak this in a couple different ways. The first way is that you have to define what your goal is. If your goal is to make a living through your work, then that should dictate a bit of which direction or directions you want to go. The second thing I'd like to address is the idea of attention and what that means. That is buying in, and rightly so, to the culture of reviewers and critique and museums and that whole subset of what we call the art world. And sure, that might be true. That if you're only working in public works, a museum might never know who you are. On the other hand, you might be making a living doing creative work. So I think it's important to define what your goal is, your ultimate goal is. I always, and you might have a very different feeling, having a gallery or galleries that support you enough so that you don't have to do other kinds of work. My analogy is sort of the NBA. It's really tough. I just think there are many opportunities out there, larger, varied markets than just galleries, and really in public art. I mean, there are many more opportunities. There are art consultants out there. There are, have you guys, Amazon's going to start selling art. I mean, it's sort of crazy what's happening. We're in a major transition. I don't know what any of it means, but there are different markets opening all the time.
When the artists have a gallery, I don't know, I've got a couple questions here. Do galleries solicit commissions, public art commissions for their artists?
Some do. Some work on it more actively than others. But galleries usually aren't very good at it. That's not their bailiwick. They're not really equipped. They don't have someone who can really walk the artist through and pay attention to all the contractual details. If you do have a gallery, go ahead. I was just going to say there's certain things you should think about. If you do have a gallery and they bring you a commission, it's not the gallery really shouldn't be taking the typical 50% in this case.
That's my next question.
Yeah, the gallery should be taking a much lower percentage. I would say somewhere between 10 and 20%, depending on what you're making. And for that 10 or 20%, if they've just found you the client and you're doing the rest of it, meaning you have to get the lawyer, you have to negotiate the contract, et cetera, their percentage should be less. If they're willing and able to take the contract, use their attorney, help you negotiate it, be the fiduciary, meaning that they get the money and then distribute it to you, all of those things, I would say they should get a bigger percentage. But usually they can't, don't, and are really not equipped to do it.
With public art,
the contract you sign. You have to sign the contract as the artist. The gallery really doesn't sign it. They want the artist to be the signatory.
With the public art jobs that you work on, how often does the art exist already, as opposed to being fabricated specifically for the job?
Well, there are different sorts of projects. If it's a project like an exterior project or site-specific, obviously it's made for that particular project. For there are projects that I've worked on the DC Convention Center, which we procured or commissioned a total of 144 works. Of those, I think about 35 were commissioned, and the rest were works that we bought, smaller scale typically, from artists in their studios. So I think in those kind of collections often a lot of them are the artwork is already made. But any site-specific work, most of the public art I'll call are for site-specific work, which means that you're not going to have something that's existing typically.
Okay. Let's open this up for questions. You guys start raising your hands if you have questions. I see a couple of you have messaged me that you do. All right, well, let's start with Kinga. Hold on, I got to find you to unmute you. Kinga, go ahead.
I did a public project in New York, and what happened is that it was through a government agency, and they hired a consultant that would be the middle person between the artist and the agency.
Right.
And the consultant decided that her fee for the project should be 75% of the budget, and the artist gets the 25%. And when I tried to discuss this with the government agency, they basically said, we can't do anything about it, you have to talk to her, and we can help you with this. And at the end of the day, the consultant was like, hey, if you don't want to do this, then I'll find somebody else. So, like, how do you deal with people that do this? Like, do you have any advice?
walk away. No, I mean I've never heard of that, honestly, especially for a government agency. If now did this did this person find you? I mean I mean that's not typically the way consultants work.
Right. I mean, I guess the agency said that they cannot deal, because they're a government agency, they could not deal with artists directly, and they had to hire art consultants to deal with the artists. And
New York
basically, I'm sorry?
This is in New York City?
Yeah. And basically, the whole budget was really up to her, how she's going to distribute it. And trust me, I tried talking to them in all sorts of ways, and they were like, no, we can't deal with it, we can talk to you. But like, how do you walk away from something? It ended up being a 400-foot mural. Like, how do you walk away from something like that?
Well, you decide whether you want to subsidize the government to make the artwork and subsidize the art consultant. I mean, yeah. I'm being serious. I'm not being facetious at all. It's like I think it's important as artists to realize that if you want to do what you want to do, which is make art and make a living with art, is you can't do it for free. You can't. Not only can you do it for free, you can't subsidize other people or agencies to do the work. So it's a business decision. You know, business might be the anthem in the arts, but truly, it's a business decision. You can't do it. It's not possible. You don't do it. And
it sounds to me like Kinga got enough money doing it, and maybe it was all the other artists who didn't get a commission at all.
I didn't follow.
I think Kinga got enough money for what she wanted to do, but the project was short-sighted or short-shrifted because so much of the budget went to the art consultant and not to other artists.
Well, I think you got to worry about. I mean, we should all worry about our neighbors and our friends and fellow artists. You got to worry about yourself. I mean, can you make this happen? If you personally could make it happen, then I think that's a decision you have to make first. First is it can you do this financially, and secondly, if you're comfortable doing it at the expense of other people, that's a question I can't really answer. But I've never heard of a consultant taking 75% of the budget.
That's ridiculous.
Wrong. There's something just inherently wrong with that.
There is. Let's move on to the next question. Ed. Go ahead, Ed.
For the longest time, this is what I want to do, is be a public artist, and I've been relatively successful. I've done a number of projects. And I guess the biggest one I did was a $150,000 project, which turned into a nightmare in a lot of ways, but I didn't scound with the funds. I completed the project. Everything got done. Took a lot of. I mean, it was a fight.
Hey, Ed, I think I get too much echo, and I think you're too far away from the microphone. I mean,
okay, I'm not even sure where the microphone is. Is this going to help?
Yeah,
does that help?
Yeah, I think the microphone's in the camera.
Well, the camera's right here.
Yep.
Okay, how's that?
That's better? Yep.
Okay, so anyway, I thought getting a $150,000 commission would basically buy me a ticket into doing more projects. And instead, I think it's like fishing. Sometimes you're going to get one and sometimes you're not. So, I mean, I was just completing another project and I'm happy about it, but I want more, and I want things to lead to more, and I don't see that necessarily happening. Can you comment on that?
Well, what I could say is that it's like I think the number of opportunities that you avail yourself, the more opportunities you will have to actually do the work. I don't think, at least, I don't think many things just come your way. I mean, that sounds sort of this big philosophical discussion, but honestly, you have to make your own opportunity, and I think you do that in a number of different ways. One of the ways to do that is there's a conference every year in different cities throughout the U.S. that the Public Art Network holds. And that's an opportunity to go and listen to their workshops, of course, but there's also almost every art administrator in the country goes. So it's an opportunity to socialize with the people that are who are going to be the first line between you and the work and the job. So it's important, it's the art world, no matter where you are in it, for the most part, it's a very personal, relationship-driven enterprise. So I think you have to avail yourself of those opportunities to meet the people that are in these positions. So,
can I ask again? I'm not clear exactly how you operate. I mean, what do you do? Do you work with artists, or exactly how do you do what you do?
Typically, I mean, there's really, I won't say typical. I mean, most of my work in the public sector has been, I am hired, by a agency, by an authority, a public authority, by a city, sometimes a developer, to be that consultant that does the master plan, that figures out what the entire budget, and then administers the process to find the artist, and then oversees and manages the whole project. So I'm often hired by by exactly the people who are going to be commissioning the artwork, as it was described, the consultant, the go-between. I don't take 75%. I'd love to be able to do that, but I don't take 75% of budget. But that's the position that I usually am in.
So you're sort of a liaison between the public sector and the artist?
Right, exactly. Or as I said, I mean, I've had several jobs with major development teams that my client is the developer. So I provide that same function of really, I end up negotiating the contract for whatever that agency is in the contract. But yeah, I'm their, I am their representative, their agent.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Ed. Layla, let's go to you. You wrote your question, but go ahead and ask it. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hey, Joel. Wondering, I live in the D.C. area, and I wasn't on Cafe, I think, at that point when you were soliciting for artists for the convention center. I was just wondering how you went about casting the net and trying to get enough artists.
Well, actually, we did not do that on Cafe. This was, I think the first call went out probably in 2001. This is a while ago now, of course.
Oh, okay.
And we had a revolving call. So the call was open for, gosh, I think about a year or more. And it was advertised in many different ways. So it was a huge net. If you didn't hear about it, I'm kind of surprised. We had the DC Commissions on the Arts and Humanities held several meetings for DC artists. They publicized it on their website. The Convention Center publicized it on their website. It went to every, all the different organizations that will host these calls. I don't have those figures anymore, but we had a pretty broad spectrum.
And then you went through the same sort of process of trying to cull a lot of people, and then ended up with your top 130 or 200 or whatever, and just kept on narrowing it down?
Yes, essentially. Yeah, without getting too complicated. Yes, exactly. We everyone had to submit their slides and portfolio. From that portfolio, the committee decided who would be appropriate, I mean, at my suggestion, who would be appropriate for the large-scale commission and whose work would be better suited for studio work. But everyone had to submit their portfolio in order to get to the next step, including, I mean, really everyone. I mean, even very, very well-known artists. Everyone went through the same process.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Brian, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. Yeah, I have a piece that I was hoping that could become a public sculpture, but it's really not designed to last a long time against the elements. And I was wondering, I mean, do you ever come across people open to showing works that are kind of meant to deteriorate over time and not necessarily be these kind of permanent structures?
Well, there is a subset of works in public place that are temporary and up for a finite amount of time and never considered to be a permanent part of a structure, part of the building. So yes, there are definitely opportunities. I see them. I see calls for those as well on Pan, and I don't think as much in cafe, but certainly in Pan you do see it. So yeah, there most certainly there definitely are opportunities for temple work.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you both. Joan, hold on. Joan Waters, go ahead.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. In the past few years, recently, there's been, with lower budgets, there's been a lot of projects, especially in my area, that are sort of more like community, urban, renewal-based, small budgets, but they want the artists to come up with something that's almost part performance, something to involve the community, but it's less oriented of making a thing, and it's more about the effect that it has on the community. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on that, especially like when you apply for that kind of thing, you know, if you haven't done that, or it's harder to kind of say, yes, you know, I can show you that I have experience doing this. They don't want a physical object, really.
Well, the way that we put sort of a terminology, we call it object-based and social practice to make it. So I have not been. I'm very interested in the whole social practice movement. I've never been in the situation where I have specifically, you know, for a client who was interested in that. I think that they're probably more about your proposal and your idea and your ability to accomplish it, rather than you know, a portfolio of what you have done. Now, I'm simplifying things tremendously. I mean, there are artists that's all they do, is, you know, work in social practice. So I think it's fascinating. It's a relatively new branch of the public art world. Very few. I mean, I'm interested to hear where you have encountered these calls for social practice. I think increasingly, I think we're going to see more of them. I'm hoping that we'll see more of it. I think that, but they're harder to define. It's certainly harder to apply to unless you have done so in the past or have some have other teammates. And I guess I would encourage you. I guess the way to answer that is I would encourage in any of these projects is they often ask for teams, either for artists or artist teams. So think about it in terms of a team and different types of people who can look into the social practice project. I mean, I think that's probably the way to approach it. Because one person can't really do those sorts of things anyway. So how do you approach it with a larger talent?
Joan, where have you? Joel's curious, and so on. Where have you seen these requests for proposals that sound like social practice?
Yeah, I'm in Phoenix, and Scottsdale's doing a lot. Tempe, and then we have some where all the cities or the whole Phoenix metro area are joining together. But it's a pretty big thing around here as a way to bring culture to the city. And we're a young city, so we're creating our culture. We don't have it yet.
Okay, cool. Without going too deep, can I just ask, can you give one very quick example of what one of those projects would be, so that people understand what you mean?
Well, like Scottsdale has something where there's something with the canals where they empty it, and it's a certain time of year they clean it out or something. So they invite artists to make some sort of happening during this event, and invites everybody to come to the event and kind of create something that wasn't there about something that has to happen anyway.
Okay.
It's interesting.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you both. I think I got another question. Madeline, I hope your question sounds right side up. Go ahead.
Well, I can't figure. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
You broke up, and now we can hear you. Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm just kind of interested in the social practice and object-based and sculpture and painting. I mean, can you give me a percentage of? To me, I think that social practice is sort of taking over with a lot of these commission type things. Can you talk about sculpture as opposed to painting, as opposed to social practice? How much of a percentage of the works that you're looking for, or these people are looking for, would be considered painting? How many would be sculpture and social practice? Does that make any sense?
Yeah,
it makes sense.
It makes sense from someone coming upside down.
Go ahead, Joel. Good luck with it. Let's talk about it. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I really couldn't speak definitively toward percentages. I think that what I see is still more object-based than social practice. I do think that I think everyone's really, really paying attention to the whole notion of social practice, because in some ways it's easier to justify with limited budgets that our cities have and states. I believe that it's a more justifiable practice, a more justifiable thing to do if you are opening up new parts of the city to culture, if you are increasing an audience, if you're changing neighborhoods and having impact, if you are creating, what we used to call creating place is now becoming sort of social practice. I never realized I was doing social practice until they named it. I believe in placemaking. Placemaking is now sort of a part of social practice. So I don't know. I don't think it's easy to differentiate and to make a hard and fast definition between some of these things. I'm not trying to be avoid the question, but I can't really answer the percentages. To be that.
How much physical evidence remains after a social practice event?
You broke up. Sorry.
I'm sorry. How much physical evidence remains after a social practice event?
I think it depends on. It absolutely is dependent on what it is. I think in something there's a legacy part of it, and some there really isn't. Hopefully that's part of the work, is that there's some legacy to it. I don't think there's any. I guess I can't speak to that.
Okay. I had really mixed feelings about social practice, and I think it's a wonderful thing, but I'm not sure it's art. And I think, Joel, you and I should go to lunch. We should discuss this. And
I think it's a fascinating topic, and you know, and I'm sort of agree with you. I don't know whether it's art either. I don't know either, but I'm deeply interested in it. So.
But you know, when graffiti came along, I'm not sure that I thought that was art either. And you know, I think ultimately you can, or comic books, or you know, things that weren't paintings, things that weren't on cave walls.
Well, you know, it goes back to the whole thing. It's highly contextual, right? I mean, if it's graffiti becomes art if it starts to be, you know, if it appears to be art. If it gets accepted to be art. Art is, you know, it's pretty contextual what it is and how it's and who's doing it, and is it a creative process? I mean, trust me, I think it's becoming more and more difficult to define what is and what isn't. Maybe it is if you call it that. Maybe it is if you believe it. I really don't know. I don't know.
Let's take one more question and then wrap this thing up. Herb, you get the last question. Go ahead, Herbert.
Hi, thank you. I had two questions. One was, Joel, do you accept work in terms of portfolio of artists?
I'm sorry, say that again?
I'll ask Joel, does it make any sense for artists to send you their portfolio?
Not so much. Not so much. I mean, I certainly in physical form, please do not. I look at, I always look. I try to always respond, but I think there's, you know, I think there's so much out there that I mean, I'm interested, but I think it's I don't think it's probably the best use of your resources to send out full portfolios. That's what I think.
I didn't mean a hard portfolio. I just meant sending it online. You know, send your work online.
Oh, look. You send me a website, I will absolutely look at it. I know you. I've met you before. But you know, if you send me the, a website, I really do try to look. And I can't promise you, but I really do try. That's what I can. That's my response.
That's a reasonable answer. I had one other question. I recently sent a large-scale installation that I found online that was very appropriate for the landscape of it was just perfect for a very large painting that I had created already, and I placed it into the landscape and sent it to the landscape architect and person who was the creator of this new renovation. And a week later, they sent me back a letter saying that they really liked it and they found it interesting, and thank you so much for this piece, and I'll be showing it to my board to see how we might get started. Now, that was a month ago, and 2 weeks later, I sent a note saying, thank you so much for your response. Is there any chance for an update? And it's a month later now, and I didn't know how long you wait or how you handle trying to find out what's cooking.
I think it depends on how much self-control you have. I think that what I know is that the timeline that institutions and agencies often give, they rarely can be held to. So things take an awful long time for decisions to be made. Awful long time.
Is it best to lay back? Probably.
Probably not.
Probably not.
No, I don't think it's ever. in my experience, with just about everything, it's never worthwhile to lay back. Doesn't mean you have to be obnoxiously persistent, but I think you have to. I think you have to be honest. I think you need to, if you have actually get fortunate to have a conversation with someone, I think it's very important to, and I do this with my work. If there's a potential for a project, I say, okay, so what's your timeline? And if they say, oh, we'll probably have something in a week or two, and I say, well, I would ask them, well, when would it be appropriate for me to call you back? Just ask the question. That way, it's clear that you are going to be active and not passive, and you're not bugging them because you've already asked the question. They're going to tell you. You know, the worst that's going to happen is they're going to ignore you, which is what's happening anyway. So
would you say a month between each bugging is waiting too long?
As I said, it depends on how much self-control you have.
Joel related some of this to basketball. I relate it to dating, you know, and if you don't hear from a girl or, you know, somebody after a certain amount of time, when is it appropriate to give up? Conversely, how long do you wait for the first kiss or the first, you know, and the answer is it depends. And, you know, sometimes waiting is a good strategy and sometimes it isn't. I think you really have to trust your own instincts on this.
I would agree with that.
Thank you.
Cool, Joel. I think we should call it a night. I think this has been a lot of information, and I appreciate all that you've shared. It's clear that you know what you're doing, and I appreciate you sharing it with artists. Let me unmute everybody so that they can, you know, say thank you also. Joel, appreciate you being with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I will put this Excel sheet. I'll send it to Paul, who can distribute it, and you can. I think it might be of some use to those of you who are interested in looking into public projects.
Again, Joel.